What if I told you that women used poison to get glowing skin, crushed their organs for a smaller waist, and wore the teeth of dead soldiers, all in the name of beauty? Welcome to the terrifying world of Victorian fashion, where the cost of beauty was pain, poison, and sometimes even death. The Victorian era might look elegant in paintings, but behind the lace and velvet, it was absolutely unhinged. We're talking corsets so tight they collapsed lungs, makeup made of lead and literal arsenic, people flexing their blue veins like it was hot. And if that's not wild enough, wait until you hear about the beauty trend that involved scavenging battlefields for teeth. Today, we're diving into 10 of the strangest, deadliest, and downright freakiest beauty standards from the 1800s. Hit that subscribe button if you're into history that shocks, fascinates, and leaves you thinking, what were they even doing back then? First up, let's dive into the strange obsession people had with tiny waists back in the Victorian era, and it was pretty intense. In the 19th century, the idea of the perfect woman was someone with an hourglass shape, and the smaller the waist, the better. We're talking about a waist size of just 16 inches. That's roughly the size of a small dinner plate. It wasn't just about looking good. Having a tiny waist was seen as a sign of being moral and in control. A smaller waist meant you were disciplined, delicate, and ultra-feminine. To get this look, women wore tight corsets made of steel and sometimes even whalebone or metal, which squeezed their bodies tightly. These corsets didn't just push fat around, they could actually change the shape of bones and organs over the years. Doctors back then had a scary term for what could happen called corset liver, which meant that the liver could get squished into weird shapes from being tightly laced in. Breathing became tough, and many women fainted in public because their lungs couldn't hold enough air. Yes, fainting couches were a real thing, and they were used quite a bit. The practice started young, too. Girls as young as 8 or 10 would get their first corsets and gradually tighten them over the years to train their bodies into smaller sizes. By the time they became adults, they could achieve that super tiny waist everyone wanted. Was it dangerous? Definitely. Was it stylish? Even more so. Many women thought that squeezing into corsets was just part of growing up, even though it could cause serious health issues like bruised ribs, stomach problems, and even risks of miscarriage or early death. Some doctors and reformers tried to raise awareness and warn about corset deformities, but most people just ignored them. After all, when the goal is to be seen as the ideal woman, a little internal damage was just seen as the cost of beauty. Just when you thought things couldn't get tighter than a 16-inch corseted waist, wait until you hear what women were putting on their faces. Spoiler alert, it could literally kill you. Next, let's chat about skin tone back in the Victorian era. Back then, having super pale skin was all the rage. The paler you were, the wealthier you seemed. It showed that you didn't have to work hard outside like the farmers and laborers, who often ended up with tanned skin. Women went to crazy and risky lengths to keep their skin looking white. They used makeup made with lead, yes, lead, which was super dangerous. This makeup gave skin a smooth, pretty look, but could also cause serious health problems like hair loss, rotting teeth, and even brain damage. Some women ended up with open sores on their faces and would just cover them up with more of that harmful makeup, which was a bad cycle. To protect their skin, women carried pretty parasols made of silk to block the sun. It wasn't just a fashion statement, it was something they really needed. Sometimes they even kept the curtains shut in their homes during the day to avoid getting any tan at all. Some rich families even put special screens on windows, and if the makeup wasn't enough, some women drank vinegar or took arsenic pills to try to lighten their skin from the inside. It was risky, but they believed it might help. So, what we see today as a nice tan would have been embarrassing back then. If you weren't super pale, you weren't considered beautiful. Alright, so you've poisoned your face white. What's next? How about showing off your veins like they're luxury accessories? Speaking of being really pale, here's something odd. Showing your blue veins was once seen as classy. That's right. If your skin was so thin and light that you could see your veins sticking out, especially on your chest, arms, and face, you were thought to be the picture of beauty. But it was more than just looking nice. It had a lot of meaning behind it. If your veins were visible, it meant you were rich enough to stay inside and out of the sun. People thought you were delicate and classy, almost like a fancy doll. During the Victorian era, many women went to great lengths to look this way. Some used light blue makeup or powders to highlight their veins, so they would pop even more in candlelight. There were even guides that showed how to paint blue lines on their skin to look like they had perfect, noble skin. This style was called the consumptive look because society oddly admired women who looked sickly, like those with tuberculosis. Women believed that being thin, having rosy cheeks and pale skin were beautiful and feminine. Some even tried to look sick on purpose by skipping exercise, using makeup for sunken cheeks, and putting on skin-whitening powders that were unsafe. So while today you might put on a sweater if someone said they could see your veins, back then it was considered a huge compliment. Now imagine this. You've gone pale, painted on your veins, but your cheeks still don't pop. Don't worry, just dab on some mercury and belladonna. Yes, actual poison for that natural glow. Now let's talk about that natural beauty glow, because in the Victorian era, women wanted to look fresh and lively, like they were glowing. But if they didn't have that rosy look naturally, they turned to some dangerous tricks. One of the most shocking was using drops from a plant called belladonna. This plant, whose name means beautiful woman in Italian, was used to make their eyes look big and dark, which was considered very attractive. However, using belladonna was risky. It could cause blurry vision, headaches, and even lead to blindness if used too often. But many women still used it, especially for fancy events where soft lighting made their eyes appear even more captivating. To get those rosy cheeks, women used makeup that contained harmful substances like lead and mercury. This made their skin look smooth and pale, with just a hint of pink on their cheeks, creating that youthful, healthy look many desired. Unfortunately, these products were toxic, leading to serious problems like skin damage, organ issues, and even death in some cases. Back then, there were no safety rules for beauty products, and many were sold by sketchy vendors without proper labels. Despite all the dangers, women felt it was worth the risk to look beautiful, even if it meant suffering in the process. Looking charming was the goal, no matter the cost. But don't go smiling too much, because bad teeth weren't just common. They were considered glamorous. And we're about to tell you why Queen Elizabeth's rotting teeth were once the height of luxury. In a surprising twist in the world of beauty standards, there was a time when having bad teeth was actually seen as a sign of wealth and glamour. This might sound strange today, but here's how it happened. Back in the 17th, 18th, and even parts of the 19th centuries, sugar was a luxury. It was expensive to buy because it was brought in from faraway places like the Caribbean. Only the richest people could afford to eat a lot of sweets like fancy cakes and candies. Because these wealthy folks enjoyed sugary treats so often, their teeth suffered. Tooth decay, blackened teeth, and missing molars became common among the aristocracy, making them unintentional symbols of status. For instance, Queen Elizabeth I of England, who lived in the 1500s, was famous for her dark, stained teeth. Many people actually admired her for this, thinking it showed how rich she was and how much she indulged in sweets. In certain elite circles, having bad teeth was like showing off a shiny luxury watch today. It signaled, "Look at me, I can afford all these delicious treats, even if they're damaging my teeth." Interestingly, there were poor women who even blackened their own teeth on purpose, using soot or makeup to appear wealthy. However, this idea of bad teeth as beautiful was not the norm for everyone. For most people, especially during the Victorian era, good hygiene and a nice smile were still important. During the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly around the time of the Napoleonic Wars, something even more shocking happened. Dentists began to make dentures from actual human teeth. These were known as Waterloo teeth. After big battles, like the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, some people would gather teeth from the bodies of fallen soldiers and sell them to dental suppliers. These teeth were cleaned up and fitted into denture plates for wealthy people in major cities like London and Paris. Why use real teeth rather than fake ones? Because natural teeth fit better and looked more authentic, plus ivories tended to stain quickly from things like wine. This practice became so common that real human teeth were highly sought after among the upper class, creating an eerie but effective way to maintain a pretty smile. It's important to note that this wasn't just about looks. Having bad teeth could be dangerous, since infections could spread and cause serious illnesses or even death. So, ironically, the rich often wore the teeth of poor, dead soldiers to keep up their appearance of wealth and charm. We've talked teeth. Now let's get into hair. Big, towering, voluminous. But did you know those elegant buns were stuffed with actual balls of old hair? In the Victorian era, women went all out when it came to their hairstyles. They loved big, fancy hairdos that were full of volume. But how did they manage to get all that height without using hairspray or hot curling tools? The answer lies in something called rats. Now, these rats aren't squeaky little animals. They're actually clever little pads made from something surprising: their own fallen hair. That's right, women would gather the hair that came out of their hairbrushes, roll it into little balls, or stuff it into mesh pads. Some women even had special porcelain containers called hair receivers on their dressing tables, where they stored hair until they had enough to make a rat. These rats played a crucial role in creating stunning Victorian hairstyles like pompadours, chignons, and bouffants. Having big hair wasn't just about looking good, it was also a way to show off femininity, social status, and even moral character. Some women were so determined to achieve their towering hairstyles that they added so many rats that their hairdos required support with wireframes and other padding. Believe it or not, some hairstyles weighed several pounds. So the next time you feel like your hair is flat, just remember that back in Victorian times, women literally wore bags of their own shed hair to impress everyone around them. The bigger the hair, the closer they were to feeling like royalty. Forget about big smiles. They were seen as rude or low class. Instead, a proper lady was expected to look sad and delicate, like she had just come out of a heartbreaking story. This style was called the sad girl aesthetic. Women were admired for showing their pain quietly and beautifully. You can see in old portraits that they often looked thoughtful, solemn, or even like they were about to cry. This wasn't just for show, it was a big part of their culture. Smiling too much was thought to be too casual, almost like it wasn't classy enough. Believe it or not, it also had to do with the cameras they used back then. Early photography took a long time to capture an image, sometimes over a minute. Holding a soft, sad look was much easier than trying to keep a smile for so long. There was more to it, though. Being sad was seen as a sign of virtue and intelligence. Women who looked like they'd just spent the night reading poetry and crying by candlelight were considered very elegant. Some even carried around black fans or tear-soaked handkerchiefs to enhance their sad appearance, even if they weren't mourning anything at all. Queen Victoria didn't just cry when she lost her husband, Prince Albert. She turned her sadness into a big part of her life. After he died in 1861, she wore black every day for the next 40 years. This wasn't just about mourning. It started a whole new fashion trend. Wearing black became something everyone felt they had to do. Because of this new trend, businesses opened up everywhere to sell mourning clothes, black bonnets, stylish umbrellas, and even black-edged stationery for writing letters. Jewelry took on a different vibe, too. People wore special brooches and lockets that sometimes had real hair from the person who had passed away. This hair was often woven into tiny portraits, flowers, or initials, making it a very personal keepsake. There were even rules about how to mourn properly. Widows had to follow strict guidelines, starting with deep mourning for an entire year. This meant no fancy silk clothes or shiny jewelry, just simple materials like crepe or jet. If someone moved into half mourning too soon, it was considered very rude. Back then, grief was more than just feeling sad. It became a whole industry. In that time, if you weren't grieving in style, people might wonder if you were truly sad at all. In the Victorian era, people had some pretty strange ideas about beauty, especially when it came to hands and feet. Women were almost obsessed with having tiny, delicate hands. If you had small hands with long, thin fingers, you were considered beautiful. Magazines back then would often talk about how lovely a woman's hands looked, praising their tapered fingers and snow-white skin. But if a woman had big hands, it was seen as a huge social setback. To keep their hands looking perfect, women wore gloves all the time. These gloves weren't just for fashion. They also helped protect their pale skin from the sun and dirt. And if a woman had rough hands, there were all sorts of products to help. Some would use fancy hand creams, while others attempted to lighten their skin with lemon juice or even used really dangerous arsenic-based treatments. Yes, arsenic. Feet were another big deal. Women squeezed their feet into tiny shoes, sometimes even a couple of sizes smaller than their real size. It must have been incredibly painful, but they did it anyway. The idea was that looking fragile and doll-like was the ultimate beauty goal. In the world of Victorian beauty, being weak and fragile was actually seen as very stylish. It's fascinating how different their beauty standards were from today's more varied ideas of what it means to be beautiful. In the Victorian era, dressing up was a big deal, and people often wore fancy clothes for almost every occasion. Imagine going to the park, and you couldn't just wear comfy clothes. Instead, you'd need to put on a corset to shape your waist, a bustle pad for extra flair, and several petticoats to make your dress puffy. You'd also wear gloves and carry a parasol to keep the sun off you. Getting a tan was considered unrefined. Even at home, women had to change outfits several times a day. There were special dresses for different times, like morning tea, visiting friends, going for a walk, and having dinner. They even had a special gown for when guests came over, just to show off their style. For these women, their clothing showed their wealth and status more than anything else. It wasn't about being comfortable, it was about looking impressive. If a woman was wearing a heavy dress and struggling to breathe, she was actually showing off her social standing. It meant she didn't have to work hard like most people did. So if you weren't sweating and finding it hard to walk in your long skirt, it probably meant you weren't dressed the right way. So next time you think modern beauty standards are intense, just remember, the Victorians were literally dying for beauty. Tiny waists, lead face powder, hair made into pillows. It was a wild time. If you enjoyed this deep dive into historical beauty and sanity, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments. Would you survive Victorian beauty standards?